Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are so excited. We are so excited. We are so excited to see you. We're excited because, as always, we have an amazing, wonderful, awesome Bible study coming to you on today, this Tuesday at 1 o'clock Bible study. There is an amazing book, family, that we have been reading. There is an awesome and amazing book that we've been reading. And I'm telling you, this book has blessed me so. And we know that this book is doing wonders for you as well. This is the author, Dr. Nidra Glover Tawab, and we've been in her book, Set Boundaries, Find Peace, a guide to reclaiming yourself. Hey, if you're on Instagram or Facebook, we want to invite you to follow this prolific clinical psychologist. Her name on Instagram is what you see on your screen at Nidra Tawab. You can follow her for some amazing, wonderful resources around this book. And let me say, she's even got a new book. She's even got a new book that was just published most recently, talking about families and what are the ways in which we can be drama free with our families. That's the name of the book, Drama Free. So we invite you to check out that new book of hers as well. You're going to absolutely love it. You're going to absolutely love it. And so now, I know I say this every week, but I'm not going to say it today. I say this is my favorite Bible study lesson, but guess what? I'm not going to say it today. I don't like this Bible study lesson today. This is a Bible study lesson that is so hard for me. And so we're going to be talking about how do we set boundaries at our jobs? How do we set boundaries at our work? That's right. We've been talking about how we set boundaries in our families, how we set boundaries in our personal relationships. We've been talking about how we set boundaries with our friends. But today is a really, really hard topic. This one is all about how do we set boundaries in our work environments. And so if I'm not talking to anybody today but myself, then that is A-okay, because this lesson is definitely for me. And so we ask you to please grab pen and paper, family, as we're going to be naming a number of resources for you to consider on today. This Bible story that we want to look at is no stranger to us. If you have pen and paper, we want you to grab pen and paper and write down Genesis chapter 39. Genesis chapter 39. We are in the entire chapter of Genesis today. We are specifically looking at Genesis chapter 39. You'll remember this story. Let me give you the backdrop of what happens in verses 1 through 18 of Genesis 39 first. In verses 1 through 18, we see that our beloved brother Joseph gets a job working for Potiphar. He is assigned to be the manager of Potiphar's mansion estate. His job or his responsibilities are not only to manage the household, but to manage the staff that also work for Potiphar. Unfortunately, our text tells us Joseph, being a very handsome, physically fit, Denzel Washington looking brother, just like our senior pastor, John Jackson, our text tells us that Joseph is a handsome brother, and unfortunately, one day, Potiphar's wife decides to flirt with him. She decides to come on to him. And our text tells us in those first 18 verses that literally after refusing to accept her advances, our brother Joseph has to literally run out of Potiphar's home, and he literally runs out of his clothes because Potiphar's wife had grabbed a hold to his clothes. And he literally has to run out of his clothes just to escape the sexual advances of Potiphar's wife onto him. Now, interestingly enough, when the story is told, Potiphar's wife doesn't tell the story that way. She absolves herself of all responsibility, and our brother Joseph is deemed the one that was wrong. She concocts a story that's not necessarily true, that basically puts Joseph in a bad light. She basically tells her husband that it was in fact Joseph who was the guilty party in this incident. And so as a result, now verse 19 gives us the conclusion to the story. Joseph is put in prison. Potiphar was furious when he heard his wife's story about how Joseph had treated her. So he took Joseph and threw him into the prison where the king's prisoners were held. And there he remained. But the Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that had happened in the prison. The warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. This is an interesting text, is it not? This is an interesting text. We see here Joseph finds himself in prison because Potiphar places him in prison after believing the lie that Potiphar's wife told him. He then decides to place Joseph in prison based on Joseph running away and basically, in some sense, forfeiting his job. And as our text highlighted, the warden of the prison becomes so shocked at Joseph's gifts and skills and talents. And he becomes so impressed with these gifts, skills, and talents that just as Joseph was doing for Potiphar, the warden now elects Joseph to be manager of the prison. Joseph is literally running the prison. And interestingly enough, our text says some interesting details that should make us say, what are the interesting details in this text? First and foremost, we want you to grab hold of verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph in prison and showed him his faithful love. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. Interestingly enough, even though Joseph is in prison, it is the Lord who is with Joseph in this unfortunate circumstance. And even the Lord allows for Joseph to be considered favored and therefore elevated to a position of power in the prison. Verse 22 highlights that as a result of Joseph becoming a favorite with the prison warden at the Lord's doing, the warden puts Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. But the irony, something that you should scratch your heads to reflect on and think about, first and foremost, is in light of toxic environments, this is still a toxic environment. This is still a toxic work environment, in particular for Joseph. Even though the Lord is with him, even though the Lord touched the warden's heart to allow Joseph to be considered the favorite of the warden, even though it seems as if Joseph has been elevated to a position of power in this quote unquote work environment, this work environment is still prison. Joseph is still incarcerated in some sense. And so one reflective question that we need to reflect on under this subject of unhealthy or toxic work environments, first and foremost, is God can still be with you in a toxic environment. God, just as God was with Joseph in this toxic prison work environment, God can still be with you in toxic work environments that you find yourself in today. Number two, This text between verses 21 and 22 also show us that you may even be elevated to a managerial position in this toxic work environment. Joseph is elevated to be the one in charge of all the prisoners, similar to how he was in charge of the entire staff of Potiphar's house. He still is elevated to a place of leadership, even behind prison walls. But the interesting dynamic again is it's still prison. So we must begin to reflect on a couple of reflective questions. What are the ways sometimes in which, even if you are elevated to a place of leadership positions, what are the ways in which a work environment can still be toxic? Because in some sense, you are still in prison. Sometimes we have a belief that says, if I'm elevated in this particular work environment, if I'm doing well, then all is well, everything is okay. But how do we, in some sense, gain a sense of self-awareness to recognize, but it's still a prison, even if you've been elevated to positions of power within the prison? Our text in verse 23, as always, goes on to say that the Lord caused Joseph to succeed, and Joseph took everything. It is possible to still be blessed, even in a toxic work environment. It is possible to reach success and still be blessed and have God's hand on you, and yet and still that work environment still be toxic, because first and foremost, let us not forget this specific detail: Joseph is still in prison. So reflective questions that this text invites us to reflect on is, first and foremost, where do you see God working with you in your own work environment? How do you experience God as working with you, being with you in your own work environment? Number two, even if you've been elevated to a position of power in your work environment, what do you say to yourself to remember, but it's still prison? It's still prison. It's still a space and place where you cannot come and go as you please, or in some sense, you can't live into the full essence of your being, because it's still prison. A third reflective question that this Genesis chapter 39 text invites us to reflect on is, how do we not become distracted by blessings that we might experience in that environment? How do we learn to still not become distracted by blessings that we might experience in that environment? Our text in the verse 23 of this chapter 39 text tells us that the Lord was blessing Joseph mightily good, right? And in some sense, that's what happens to us in our work environments. We may achieve success, and God may continue to bless us with amazing material possessions. But how do we remember to not become distracted by those material possessions? Because at the end of the day, it is still prison. Now we turn to our beloved sister, Nidra Tawab, who explains to us there are some strategies and interventions that we need to gain in order to survive toxic work environments and then thrive out of toxic work environments. She says, first and foremost, it's important that we find a balance between energy, clarity, self-worth, and self-respect. We have to find a balance between energy, clarity, self-worth, and self-respect. How we maintain work boundaries is reflecting on, does this give us energy and clarity? And at the same time, does it honor our self-worth and give us a sense of self-respect? So such statements that we can make If we discern this is a toxic work environment, we can make such statements as, I want to listen more, but I'm focused on finishing this now. Can we reconnect? Or, thanks for the opportunity, but I'm currently booked. Can I check back when my schedule opens? Or, I love to support this, but I need to take something off my plate. Let's review my tasks and reprioritize. Or, I can't take on anything new until a particular date. Does that work for you? These 4 statements allow us to achieve energy and clarity, self-worth, and self-respect. Let me ask a question for reflection. Do you think Joseph could have made one of these statements to the prison warden? Do you think Joseph could have turned down the position of being manager at this particular prison where he was being held captive? I wonder how this story would have went, or how the story would have been written if Joseph would have turned down the warden's invitation to be manager of the prison. Things that make you say, So Dr. Tawab invites us to reflect on a couple of actions that are at red lights for us, or yellow lights, or stop signs, to let us know we might have issues at work that might be toxic. For example, she invites us to reflect on, when you're at work, are you always doing work for others? And not just doing your work, but more so engaging in doing everybody else's work? Are you asked about personal issues in your life? Do coworkers ask you to talk about, hey, are you married? Do you want to be married? Do you have children? Do you feel as though you need to take on more than you can handle? Do you struggle with not delegating? Do you struggle with flirting with coworkers inappropriately at work? Do you find yourself working without pay? Do you find yourself not taking advantage of your vacation days? Do you find yourself saying yes to tasks you can't responsibly complete? Do you find yourself engaging in stressful interactions? Do you find yourself working during your quote unquote downtime? Or doing jobs intended for more than one person? Do you find yourself not taking needed time off? These become the important reflective questions that we have to begin to ask ourselves when we think about our jobs, when we think about our work environments. If you say yes to any of these on this particular chart, chances are you probably work at a toxic work environment. Dr. Tawab also invites us to reflect on particular dynamics that exist in a toxic work environment. For example, first, toxic work environments also include not only working long hours, as we said before, but gossiping about several people. That's right. Never in your work environment should you gossip. Gossip creates and facilitates a toxic work environment. Or when you're not paid for additional hours that you work. When there's cliques among your coworkers. Being mandated to complete more work in a limited time frame. Negative communication among peers or superiors. A narcissistic boss. Being bullied or being sexually harassed. Oh, wow. Which one stand out for you in your current place of employment? Do any of these resonate Do any of these resonate with you? Dr. Nidra Tawwab says, at some point we have to do inventory of our work environments, and we have to begin to ask ourselves, do these particular behaviors run rampant in our work environments? If so, she says, it is so important that we plan our exit strategy of how we're going to leave this toxic work environment. I'm going to pause there for a second. If somebody has something they'd like to add or say.
Yeah, we don't have anybody making a comment yet. So those of you who are in the live chat, don't hesitate to post up something. This is Dr. Nidra. This is a real challenge. Going back to when you asked the question, could Joseph have negotiated? And the assumption is that he was even given an invitation and not ordered.
Ah.
The prison warden could have said, "This is what you're gonna do." And the other part is, I think you were hinting at, to negotiate might have meant, some worse conditions. And that goes into the challenge that Dr. Nidra raises up, is that many people I know are in jobs that they have to work to put food on the table, and their options are few. And they end up having to endure much of what's in these lists, with little wiggle room. Everybody has a choice to quit, but then what happens, this is really challenging,
Most definitely. Most definitely. This is very hard. This is very, very hard. I myself am feeling very convicted. I myself am feeling very convicted around my own work, toxic work environment that I'm experiencing. So yes, I totally get it. I totally get it. Dr. Tawwab gives us some wonderful resources that we can implement, some amazing strategies that we can implement. And I'm going to have two conversations at once. We're going to think about Genesis 39, verses 19 and beyond. And we're going to ask ourselves, could Joseph have initiated some of these strategies and interventions or no? And then we're also going to reflect on our own jobs and our own work environments. Do we feel comfortable initiating some of these strategies and interventions in our own work environments today? So, for example, first and foremost, if you're in a toxic work environment, Dr. Tawwab invites us to practice these 7 strategies or these 7 interventions. First and foremost, she says, practice what boundaries might be the most helpful. She says, you can think of boundaries, whatever those boundaries would look like, and you can enact those boundaries and consider which boundaries might be most helpful. You can enact particular boundaries and reflect on which boundaries would be most helpful. She says, in some sense, also identify healthy people in the toxic environment. So what would it have looked like for Joseph to initiate some sort of boundaries that could have been most helpful in this prison environment? And who would be healthy people in this toxic work environment that Joseph could have leaned on in some sense? Who are healthy people in your own toxic work environment that you feel comfortable to lean on for support in some sense? It is so important to find to identify and to find or identify healthy people in a toxic work environment, because she wants us to know we should be willing to build relationship with those people. We should be willing to build relationship with those people, because building relationship with those people helps us survive the toxic work environment. Number one. Number two, she says building relationships with healthy people in a toxic work environment also inspires us to change, either change the environment or leave the environment, meaning change our own work set. She says it is usually because we have built relationship with healthy people in the toxic work environment where now change will occur. Because the two of you will get to talking about the injustices and atrocities, and sooner or later, she says, you will begin to start plotting or planning your exit strategy or how to survive the toxic work environment. Number three, she says, document, document, document. Document your issues with specific dates and times. Why is this important? This becomes important if you ever have to get the legal courts involved. If you ever discern God calling you to file a lawsuit against this organization, documentation is going to be key. If ever you want to consult with human resources to report your leader, your manager, or your director, documentation is what's going to be key to provide your human resources rep for them to do a thorough investigation on your toxic work environment claim. Number four, she says, if your boss isn't part of the problem, talk to your boss. I find it interesting in this text, we don't know if Joseph actually had a heart-to-heart with Potiphar. Maybe he did, and Potiphar just didn't believe him. Hence why Potiphar decided to throw him in jail in the first place. In this case, maybe Potiphar was part of the problem. But if your boss is not a part of the problem at your own job, Dr. Tawab invites us to talk to our boss. Speak up about your needs in meetings to superiors and with coworkers. In some sense, she says, never remain silent. Never remain silent about your needs, about the oppression or issues that you are forced to grapple with in this toxic work environment. There is a saying, there's a prolific and amazing saying that says, if you are silent about your oppression, number one, it'll keep happening. Number two, they'll say that you enjoyed it. Those wise words were penned by Zora Neale Hurston. If you are silent about your oppression, they will kill you, her words exactly, and say you enjoyed it. Talk to human resources about the office culture. That becomes pivotal. That becomes pivotal. Talk to human resources about the office culture. And frankly, if you're doing inventory and reflecting on your job and your job does not have a human resources department, that says a lot. That says a lot. If you read this particular chapter in depth, she even highlights, don't work at a job that doesn't have a human resources department. She said a particular job that does not have a human resources department means that there will be no checks and balances around toxic work environments that will occur in that space. Never work at an institution that does not have a human resources department. Last but not least, she says, find support outside the office to manage your work-related stress, such as talking to a therapist. She says, in some sense, if you talk to a therapist will begin to help you to see that the work environment is toxic, and then a therapist will be able, from a professional counselor standpoint, to help you develop an exit strategy from leaving this toxic work environment. It is so very important, she says, to talk to a therapist. Talk to a therapist who will help you in some sense. I'll pause for, oh, wait, before I pause for a second, I'm going to share this. I'm going to share one more, before I pause for a second, I'm going to share one more slide. She says it's so important for us to set boundaries at work through these particular statements. It's so important for us to set boundaries at work through these particular statements. I won't be able to take on any additional projects. I cannot work past 5 o'clock or whatever is the ending time for your work shift. I don't check work emails while I'm on vacation. She even goes on to say, what would it look like if you were to not check your emails when you're at home in the evenings, or not check your emails when you're on your day off, not check your emails on the weekends, on Saturdays or Sundays. I need more assistance with my workload. I don't talk about personal subjects at work. It makes me uncomfortable. If you want to chat, let's have lunch together. That way I can focus on our conversation. Thank you for inviting me to hang out with you this weekend, but I won't be able to make it. I don't want to grab drinks after work, but how about going to a yoga class? She says, key to a toxic work environment is never engaging in alcohol consumption or any other substance like drugs of some sort with coworkers. Never, 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 never engage in alcohol consumption or drugs with coworkers, because that further complicates this toxic work environment, and that further complicates your ability to survive this toxic work environment. Last but not least, she highlights that it is okay to say something such as, I'm not available to help you with your request. I need to focus my time right now on my family. I need to focus my time right now on my family. Do any of these particular statements stand out for you? Which one of these particular statements stands out for you?
We don't have any responses. Obviously, people are brooding over these because, as you started out, this is even more painful than the marriage boundary.
Yes, 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 yes.
Because every decision has an opposite counter effect, right? And so you have to plan for that. And all of these, as good as they are, and they are good. I wish I had learned some of these a long time ago. They also put in the present, most of the present work environment. They also put you on a course where people are going to say you're not sociable, you're not a team player, and things like that. And you just have to live with that. Kathleen says the one that stands out for her is, I won't be able to take on any additional projects. And the last thing I want, I really, as you were talking and looking at these, there are several things I think that a high school senior should graduate with. One of them is a voter's registration card, where they go through some stuff about, the responsibility of voting. The other is this: as you all get ready, whether you're going to college or you're going into the work world, here are some keys to healthy boundaries that you are going to need when you go into work, and help folk coming straight out of school to have some standards as they're looking for employment, career, and all that stuff. Yeah.
Most definitely. Most definitely, most definitely, most definitely, most definitely.
Yeah, Jeanette says, she says, yes, I never socialize with coworkers after work. You become a target for others' conversations with bosses. Oh, yeah.
Yes, 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 yes.
Oh, yeah.
Most definitely, most definitely, most definitely, most definitely. Yes, yes, yes. That is so key. That is so key. That is so key. Thank you so much for naming that.
Mhm.
Another interesting point that Dr. Tawab invites us to reflect on or think about in some sense is, in particular, our relationships with our boss. In particular, our relationships with our boss. Now, if you don't hear anything else I have said today, she wants us to first and foremost grapple with this understanding that our relationships with our bosses mirror our family relationships. Oh, our relationships with our bosses mirror our family relationships. What do we mean what do I mean when I say that? Or when I'm citing her, when I'm citing her with saying that. She says in some sense, whatever relationship you had with your mother and father, she said that boss, whether they are male or female, will begin to take on the characteristics of your mother or your father. Hence why, in some sense, this becomes also or plays into the dynamic of an unhealthy, toxic relationship. She explains, if you had a father who was overbearing or had some particular challenges, your male boss may have those same particular challenges, and you may begin to experience your male boss like your father. If you had a mom who had some particular challenges, you'll begin to experience your female boss in that same way. Let me give you some examples. First and foremost, we learn we need to start having conversations about some work environments that mirror a dysfunctional household, complete with shaming, secret keeping, fear tactics, intense pressure, and lack of boundaries. There's a belief that Dr. Tawab highlights. Whatever role you played in your family and your family was dysfunctional, you will play that same role in a dysfunctional work environment. Get that for a second. Whatever was the dysfunctional role that you played in your family, you'll play that same dysfunctional role in a dysfunctional work environment. So in some sense, Dr. Tawab says there's 5 dysfunctional types of ways we can work at our jobs. There's 5 dysfunctional roles we play in our work environment. Number 1, we can make excuses and be the caretaker in the dysfunctional work environment, where we make excuses for co-workers at the job. We become enablers. We become people pleasers. We want the employees to stay connected, so we'll easily smooth over job conflicts. We take on all the problems that are not ours in this work environment, and we carry all the problems that are not ours in this unhealthy work environment. We're in denial about the severity of this workplace being dysfunctional. And we try to fix the dysfunctional work environment by being self-sacrificing. So one reflective question for us to grapple with today is, are you the caretaker? Are you the caretaker in your dysfunctional work environment? Are you the caretaker in your dysfunctional work environment? Do these particular behaviors stand out as what you've done or what you're currently doing? The scapegoat. The scapegoat is the second dysfunctional role that will play in our toxic work environments. Usually we function, if we're the scapegoat in our family, in our toxic dysfunctional family, we'll be the scapegoat in a toxic dysfunctional work environment where we're usually blamed for all the problems in the company. Often we're seen as the problem teammate of, or the black sheep of the company. We internalize shame and guilt. We crave independence and distance from the family company. We're constantly criticized by the team or the company. We're the whistleblower for the dysfunction of the family work environment. We're ignored for speaking the truth of this dysfunctional, toxic work environment. So the next reflective question that we would have to grapple with, are you the scapegoat for your toxic work environment? Are you the scapegoat for your toxic work environment? Number 3, are you the hero in your toxic work environment? Because you also function as the hero in your family. Do you more so take on a parent role? Do you seek to overachieve? Do you strive for perfectionism? Constantly trying to make this work environment look good. Often burdened by guilt, shame, and pressure that will never be talked about. Do you try to normalize this toxic work environment by telling yourself false hope or telling others false hope? Do you demonstrate that you're successful on the outside, meaning your external shell, but meanwhile you have a wealth of struggles internally? So the third reflective question that we have to grapple with is, am I the hero in my toxic work environment? Just like I'm the hero in my family. The mascot. The mascot is the jokester, the humorous one, the one that's never taken serious. They use humor as a way to avoid problems at the job. They crave approval. They appear as if nothing really bothers them, but they're often burdened with guilt and shame and fear. They're constantly trying to stay busy to avoid the dysfunction in this toxic work environment. They usually feel confused and lonely as they continue to avoid feeling pain. Are you the mascot in your toxic work environment? The lost child. Are you the lost child in your toxic work environment where you're just invisible? You withdraw as a way to deal with the toxic work dysfunction. You try to avoid all conflict and talk about dysfunction at the job by spending time alone. You deny your own needs by burying your feelings of guilt and shame. You have difficulty making decisions. You try your best not to create any problems. Last but not least, you or me or us all would have to reflect on, are we the lost child in our toxic work environments? Are we the lost child in our toxic work environments? Dr. Nitra Tawwab says, generally speaking, our boss, as I said earlier, our bosses at work will begin to take on the toxic parental figures, beliefs, and attitudes that we were raised with in our own household. So if we have a father wound as a result of our own biological father's actions, we may now experience trust issues or never feeling good enough, or we may wrestle with abandonment issues, or we may even take in abuse. And so in some sense, Dr. Tawwab says, these same characteristics will show up in your work environment, in your relationship with your boss. If your boss triggers your father wounds because your boss is reminding you or acts like your father, at work, you may have trust issues. At work, you may never feel like you're good enough. At work, you may feel like the whole team is abandoning you. At work, you may experience being abused. Likewise, if you grew up with a mom who was critical, unapproving, passive aggressive, unavailable, codependent, controlling, and pessimistic, your female boss might also trigger this mother wound, because your female boss may also be critical, unapproving, passive aggressive, unavailable, codependent, controlling, and pessimistic. And so a reflective activity that Dr. Tawab invites us to reflect on, she says, in some sense, we all have a mother wound or father wound. Some of us have just one, some of us have both. She says, in order to survive and thrive out of an unhealthy, toxic work environment, another strategy we can employ is reflecting on, with our bosses in particular, how did I deal with my toxic mom? Whatever was the strategies or interventions I utilized to deal with my toxic mom, that's the same strategies and interventions I have to utilize to deal with my toxic female boss at work. She invites us to reflect on, okay, want to know another strategy for interacting with a toxic boss who is male, who triggers your father wounds? She says, ask yourself, how do I interact with my father so that his toxicity won't bug me and won't create any father wounds? She says, whatever you do to interact with your unhealthy father, you need to do those same behaviors when interacting with your unhealthy male boss at work. She says, because whatever is the dysfunction in our household, we will unfortunately recreate or mirror that same dysfunction in our work environment. Whatever was the toxic behaviors of a mom or a dad who wounded us, we'll also relive those same wounds from toxic bosses who are functioning like our unconsciously our mother or our father. I'll pause there for a second.
We don't have any new comments, but yeah, yet again, this is good stuff. And it's another place where these would be very helpful, would be in seminary.
Most definitely. Most definitely. Most definitely. Most definitely.
Yeah.
Most definitely. Most definitely. Most definitely. Most definitely. Last but not least, family, Dr. Tawab says therapy is key. Therapy is key. She says, how do we deal with a toxic work environment? She says, all of us must engage in therapy. She says, in some sense, talking with a therapist about our deep-seated issues, the roots of our deep-seated challenges, will help us be able to better survive in and thrive away from toxic work environments. She says it's so very important to consider therapy, because a therapist will provide us long-term strategies or interventions for getting out of these toxic work environments. If you don't already have a relationship with a therapist, we invite you to visit one of these websites. These websites are amazing. These are resources that you can check out if you don't currently have a relationship with a therapist. These are websites you can check out. She also, or I'm saying not she, well, she says it, but I'm going to expound on it. She says it's so important also in the midst of a toxic work environment to practice these spiritual practices. This is the tree of contemplative practices. Now it says contemplative, but it's really spiritual practices. She invites us to look at this tree and reflect on what spiritual practices can we practice in the midst of working at a toxic work environment. She says, if you can learn to practice these spiritual practices, this will give you encouragement in the midst of being in a toxic work environment as well. Our spirituality gives us a sense of encouragement while we're yet waiting for the next job. So as you look at this tree, I would invite you to pick out a particular practice that you would deem most helpful for you, and then actually do it. Actually try to practice these particular spiritual strategies and interventions. That will be so very helpful for us. And last but not least, she says, at some point, we cannot be afraid to jump. At some point, we cannot be afraid to jump. At some point, we have to leave the toxic work environment and go into new waters. Travel into new waters. Even if we are by ourselves in this new space and there's nobody else there, even if this means that we have to just jump, not knowing exactly where we're going to land, even if this means that in this new space that we're in, it's going to be a new space we've never been in before. She says, in some sense, we can't be afraid to just jump, family. We can't be afraid. We cannot be afraid. We cannot be afraid to just go on ahead and jump. So as we close, she wants us to reflect on these particular questions to help us in our reflections about our toxic work environments, how to survive them and how to thrive out of them. She invites us to reflect on these particular questions. What is one boundary that you can implement in any work environment? What is your work schedule? What times are you willing to work outside of your work schedule? Given what you know about your boss, what's the best way to set boundaries with them? Do you need to set any boundaries with coworkers? How do you think you'll benefit from setting boundaries at work? Thank you so much, family. Thank you. I know that this was a very hard topic for us today, but I celebrate us jumping in and tackling this. Next week, we're going to talk about self-care or setting boundaries with social media. Dr. Nidra Tawab says, in addition to learning to set boundaries with family, friends, personal relationships, and work, she said it's so important to set boundaries with social media and practice self-care with our social media. So feel free to come on back and join us. And there's an amazing Bible story that we're going to talk about that relates to social media and boundaries with social media.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, family.
Thank you all. Please share this. You know someone who's working retail right now and being harassed and having frustration and anxiety. This will help them. And then invite somebody back next week, because you all of us know somebody that is addicted to social media. So please, we look forward to you coming back and sharing this. God bless you all. Take care now.